We have breaking news from the Supreme Court, and this has the potential to impact at least the political standing of the president and possibly the presidential race. The justices have just ruled against the president's attempts, against the president's attempts to shield his financial records and tax documents from New York prosecutors.
So, there's big news coming from the Supreme Court, and it could really shake things up for the president's political standing and even the presidential race itself. The justices have once again shot down the president's efforts to keep his financial records and tax documents away from New York prosecutors. This means he's going to have to hand over his taxes to the grand jury in New York unless he can come up with arguments that anyone else would typically use to object in court. The Supreme Court has sent the whole case back down to the lower courts. Now, let's get to the juicy part. The corruption files are officially out in the open. This includes his tax records, various business dealings, and all that questionable financial paperwork that Trump tried.
So the president must turn over his taxes to the grand jury in New York unless he can come up with the same kind of arguments that any other person would be able to raise as an objection in court. So the Supreme Court sent the Vance case, the New York grand jury case, back to the lower courts, but it took away all the arguments the president made about why he is different.
So hard to keep off the radar all the way to the Supreme Court. Right now, those records are in the prosecutor's hands, and they're digging through it all. It's like a grand jury has it lined up for a thorough investigation. And here comes Melania. Trump deciding it's her moment to speak up. It's interesting how she chose to break her silence right when the tension is at its peak. Keep in mind, she didn't choose to speak up when the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago or after multiple indictments came down, one after the other, or even while he was in a civil trial with cameras rolling everywhere. No, she sat back and observed everything unfold for months and somehow decided that this was the right time to talk about how tough things have been for their family over the last few years.
First Lady Melania Trump joins us now for an exclusive interview. Good morning to you, Madam First Lady.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm excited about the movie. I hope to go see it this weekend. But first, let's talk about some of the news that's happening around our country. And let's start with what's happening in Minnesota. There are these protests, there are these shootings. The world is divided. There's pressure on both sides.
Now, I get it. Melania has every right to speak her mind, just like anyone else in this country. But let's be real about the timing. You don't need to have a degree in political analysis or be a Washington insider to understand the backdrop against which she's making her comments. It's when the corruption files are landing on prosecutors' desks and investigators are literally sifting through years of records looking for fraud that the First Lady walks up to the microphone and shares how challenging things have been for them. Quite the choice if you ask me.
We need to unify. I'm calling for unity. I know my husband, the president, had a great call yesterday with the governor and the mayor, and they're working together to make it peaceful and without riots. I'm against the violence, so if we protest in peace.
However, reports suggest she has no interest in getting involved in Trump's legal issues, not announce. She intentionally avoids court appearances, never shows up for hearings, and essentially treats his legal battles as his alone to handle. On one hand, you have the public version of Melania, who stands before cameras advocating for her husband, claiming he brings the necessary change. Then there's the private Melania, who seems to have created a solid barrier between herself and every legal predicament he faces. That's not just an interesting tidbit. It's a crucial part of the narrative.
This past weekend, we saw this monster storm just pummel so many states across our country. 34 people, as of this morning, have died. 500,000 are still without power. 28,000 flights have been canceled. That's the most since COVID. And we watched you when you went to the flood zones in North Carolina, when you visited those precious girls at Camp Mystic down in Texas. You went to the fires, the Palisade fires in California, Las Vegas for the shootings during the first term. I know you went to Puerto Rico during the floods in the first time.
The divide between what she expresses on camera and her actions off-screen reveals more about their situation than any official statement could. This isn't just a story about a family facing challenges. It's about how they choose to deal with it. And that speaks volumes about the nature of their relationship and the pressures they're navigating. It's quite a big deal when you think about it. The Supreme Court of the United States, which is the top court we have, just dismissed Trump's argument that he had absolute immunity from a subpoena issued by a grand jury in New York. That's right.
Trump's attorneys argue that, quote, President Trump has absolute immunity, adding that under our system of separated powers, the judicial branch cannot sit in judgment over a president's official acts. That doctrine is not controversial, according to his attorneys. We should note, as the question of immunity is being decided by an appeals court, it's clear the scope of presidential immunity is, in fact, quite controversial.
He was saying that a sitting president and even a former president could never be forced to share their financial records with prosecutors. He claimed no court had the authority to make him comply and that grand juries couldn't touch him. But in a rather strong statement, the Supreme Court made it clear that's not how the Constitution operates. No one, including him, is above the law. Because of that ruling, New York authorities now have their hands on years' worth of records from the Trump Organization for fraud investigations.
Okay, now go back to court and make the same kind of arguments anybody else would make about why you think these subpoenas are intrusive. It puts him on the same standard, basically, in other words, as anybody else trying to block a subpoena. Makes it much, much, much harder for the president to keep this material out of the hands of the grand jury in New York.
We're talking about a treasure trove of documents, tax returns going back over a decade, business filings that lay out every deal and transaction, and payments from foreign entities that raise a lot of eyebrows. This is the very material Trump spent millions trying to keep under wraps, and now it's out in the open, not going back in the box anytime soon. Now, I have to mention Melania breaking her silence right at this moment. That's no accident. It seems to be part of a strategy. Whether you're a fan of Trump or can't stand him, the unfolding of these corruption files is something every American ought to pay attention to. This goes beyond political affiliations. It's about the facts, and we all know paper trails don't lie. Let's take a moment to rewind, though, because most folks seem to completely miss the point of this story. They see a headline about Melania breaking her silence and assume, oh, she must have given an interview, made some sweet comments about her husband, stood by him, and that's that. But that couldn't be further from the truth. To really grasp what Melania is up to right now and why she's doing it, you have to look at the legal whirlwind swirling around Trump at this moment. And believe me, it's not just one investigation or one court case with a single prosecutor throwing questions at him. It's a complex web of financial scrutiny that's piling up. For years, there's been a buildup of tension that's now coming to a climax. It all started with the tax records. Trump fought hard, really hard, to keep his tax returns away from prosecutors. He took his battle all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing for executive privilege and claiming absolute immunity, saying that being president somehow protected him from any subpoenas related to his personal finances. He threw every legal obstacle he could find in the way. His lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to delay things. But the Supreme Court made a landmark decision that'll be studied in law schools for a long time. They made it clear that being president or having been president doesn't give you a free pass to hide your financial records from a grand jury. It was a firm, nope, that's not how it works in America. After that ruling, you'd think that'd be the end of it, right? The court said to hand over the records, which prosecutors began reviewing page by page. But here's the kicker that a lot of people overlook. Those records didn't just reveal what Trump paid in taxes, or rather what he didn't pay. They opened up a whole new world. We're talking about business dealings that had never been scrutinized before, revenue streams that raised eyebrows, and foreign payments from entities that the public had never seen. It was like laying out the entire financial framework of the Trump Organization for prosecutors to examine. Every shell company, every holding entity, every revenue stream was suddenly in the spotlight. On top of all that, we have the New York investigations into possible fraud. There are allegations that the Trump Organization inflated property values when seeking loans, making their buildings appear worth far more than they really were, only to turn around and deflate those same values when it was time to pay taxes, thus lowering what they owed. This isn't just bending the rules a bit. If proven true, it's textbook fraud. Now, with actual documents and internal records in hand, prosecutors can dive deep into every one of those transactions. That's the legal backdrop we're looking at right now. So, with all the investigations happening, numerous prosecutors digging deep, and financial records getting pulled into the spotlight by the highest court, Melania Trump decided to step out and give a rare public interview right in the midst of all this chaos. It's interesting to see how she approached it, especially the words she chose to use, and those she didn't use at all really reveal how the Trump family is navigating this challenging time together. When Melania made her recent comments, she described the years between her husband's first and second terms as incredibly tough. She talked about the mountain of investigations, the FBI search at Mar-a-Lago that made headlines everywhere, and the seemingly endless legal battles. In a way, she framed it as a family ordeal, saying they got through it together, that it was really hard on all of them, but ultimately made them stronger as a family unit. Now, she claims she's more involved than ever. On the surface, sure, that sounds supportive. It gives the impression of a devoted wife standing by her husband through thick and thin. But here's where it gets dicey. She never once addressed the actual allegations against him, not even a peep. She didn't say those fraud claims are false. She didn't mention that his tax records would vindicate him. She didn't even claim that the investigations are just politically driven. And she completely avoided using witch hunt, a phrase her husband has loved since day one. All she mentioned was that it was challenging, really challenging. Your husband is the sitting president and facing investigations from multiple prosecutors at both state and federal levels. Courts are forcing his financial records out for everyone to see. And the best you can offer in his defense is that it's been challenging that doesn't really defend him. It's more like a carefully crafted statement whipped up by pricey lawyers to keep things smooth. Melania recently shared her thoughts with Fox News Digital about her support for Trump's return to the White House, expressing hope that they will lead America with love and strength. It sounds lovely and could even inspire a nice greeting card, but she was careful not to touch on the serious criminal charges looming over him. She completely sidestepped mentioning the civil rape trial in the classified documents case. Instead, she opted for vague positive statements that could mean a lot or absolutely nothing. Now, beneath that polished public persona, there are whispers from those who know her best. Reports say she wants to steer clear of Trump's legal issues. She's not showing up for court appearances, missing hearings, and skipping sitting behind him at the defense table like many political spouses have done in the past. The insiders have described her perspective as viewing Trump's legal troubles as his decisions, not hers. That phrase really hits home. It suggests a clear boundary she's drawing. It's worth reflecting on what that really means. This isn't just about giving her husband some space during a challenging time. It reads as a strategic move to create distance. As prosecutors dig into corruption files, tax records, and years of business documents for their cases, that boundary starts to feel less like a personal choice and more like a well-thought-out legal strategy. Imagine if the investigations turn problematic, if new charges come to light, or if the financial documents uncover something useful for prosecutors. Melania has already set the stage to claim that she was separated from the whole mess. She might say she supported him politically and stood by him emotionally, but when it comes to his financial choices and legal challenges, she portrays them as his concerns alone. Melania's recent actions have sparked quite a bit of chatter. And honestly, when you take a step back and think about it, this could be one of the smartest moves any of them have made during this whole saga. When things start to feel like they're closing in, and they really are, it's usually the person who can claim they weren't involved in any of the questionable decisions who ends up walking away without any real mess to deal with. What's wild is that she's managing to do both sides at the same time. Outwardly, she's sounding supportive, declaring, "I believe in my husband and I stand with him." But behind the scenes, she's making it crystal clear to her close circle that she's staying away from his legal troubles and wants nothing to do with them. It's not just a tightrope act. It's like performing gymnastics on a tightrope over a canyon while one side is on fire. And the timing of her comments is quite telling. The corruption files and financial records didn't just make their way to the media randomly. They were released due to judicial rulings all the way up to the Supreme Court. This information is now part of ongoing criminal and civil investigations. Melania picking this precise moment to speak out publicly in a significant way about the struggles her family is facing isn't just a fluke. It's a clever strategy. So whether you see her as being brave or coldly strategic, it's obvious she's playing this game with a long-term plan in mind. Now, let's dive into what's really in those files, because that's where things get serious, not only for the Trump family, but potentially for our whole country for years to come. There are definitely 3 or 4 major issues happening all at once. And if you don't see how they're interconnected, you're only getting a glimpse of the bigger picture. You're staring at individual puzzle pieces when you really need to step back to see how everything fits together. I've got to say, the corruption files we're talking about are no joke. They're pretty extensive, not just a few pages of questionable tax returns. We're dealing with years' worth of records from the Trump Organization, including financial documents, tax filings from over a decade, and internal business papers that were never supposed to be public. These records include detailed revenue statements showing exactly where the money came from and where it went. And guess what? Every single one of these documents is now with New York prosecutors who have been diligently building their cases on potential fraud for years. All of this was made possible by the Supreme Court, which made it clear that a president is not above the law, shutting down Trump's argument that he had absolute immunity from a grand jury subpoena. Once the court said that, the floodgates opened. Prosecutors obtained the records, and their investigations expanded into areas that weren't even on anyone's radar. So now every financial decision the Trump Organization has made in recent years is being scrutinized closely by teams of forensic accountants and seasoned prosecutors who know their stuff. This isn't just speculation or some wild conspiracy theory floating around online. It's documented legal fact. Courts mandated this. Records have been handed over, and the investigations are very much alive. On another note, Melania's public statements seem carefully crafted to offer emotional support while keeping her from any legal problems. It might sound a bit cold or clinical, but just look at her wording. She talks about how difficult things are and emphasizes leading with love and strength. It's all very emotional, focusing on feelings. She doesn't say the charges are false, doesn't claim the records will prove his innocence, and doesn't argue against any specifics brought by the prosecutors. It's all about emotions without stepping into factual territory. Melania has really been careful about what she says, especially when it comes to her husband's legal troubles. She emphasizes her feelings, talks about family, and reflects on how tough the journey has been. Then that's where she stops. It makes you wonder if her silence about the ongoing legal issues is because she just doesn't want to comment, or if her expensive lawyers have advised her to steer clear of anything that could come back to bite her later. It's probably a mix of both if we're being real here. Regardless, the outcome is the same. Melania has been clear enough on the public record that she is emotionally supportive of her husband while keeping herself legally distant from his business dealings and legal issues. And that's a pretty big distinction, especially when you're linked to someone facing several investigations. There's a huge difference between saying, "I feel for my family during this hard time," and outright claiming these charges are completely false. One keeps you in the clear, while the other could drag you into a deposition where everything you've ever said could be thrown back at you. Every word she picked was thought out, measured, and deliberate, which says a lot about what's really happening behind closed doors in that family. Also, it's become pretty clear that there's an intentional barrier between Melania and Trump's legal mess. This isn't just me trying to read between the lines. Sources close to Melania have pointed out that she views his business and legal decisions as his own, not hers. She stays far away from carouses, doesn't get involved with his legal teams, and skips out on strategy meetings about his cases. Instead, she puts her energy into her own public persona, raising their son, Barron, and working on her own projects. When the FBI came to search Mar-a-Lago, there were reports that she was irritated about the agents going through her personal things and spaces. It's fascinating how she manages to keep her world separate from his, and that's a critical piece of the puzzle that many overlook. It's pretty interesting to see how Melania has reacted compared to Trump regarding his legal problems. While he's been all over social media raging about the investigations and crying witch hunt, she's taken a much calmer stance. She's not pushing back with anger or screaming about political persecution. Instead, she's just annoyed that strangers are rummaging through her closet. That shows a completely different perspective than what her husband is expressing at the same time, doesn't it? Melania clearly recognizes the seriousness of what's happening. She's not in denial about the legal mess Trump is in. It seems she's made a conscious choice to distance herself from his battles. Just think about that for a second. When your spouse, the person with whom you share your life, looks at your legal troubles and essentially says, "This is on you," it speaks volumes. It sends a significant message about the reality behind the scenes at Mar-a-Lago. If the person closest to Trump wants no part of his legal issues, it leaves everyone else wondering why that is. And now, with everything going on, the corruption files, the tax records, and the fraud investigations, Melania's carefully crafted distance is becoming more pronounced. All these threads are converging right now.